Well, how about that? It says bold predictions. Well, we're predicting that we don't know where Lane Kiffin is today. I'm using Oxford doing practice, but
Mm-hmm.
other than that, I can't tell you where he is.
Yeah.
Any plane sightings or buses that you've seen?
No, no, there's been nothing in particular. It's just everybody continues to lose their mind as this, heads into yet another day. I would say I wonder how long it can go on, but having been on some message boards in my past and
Hmm.
really delved deep into some of this stuff, I know that these people care, as much about this as they do almost anything else in their lives. So for as long as Lane Kiffin's future remains up in the air, stuff
Hmm.
like that will continue to happen.
A couple things I found out. One, Oklahoma, yeah, Ole Miss, the Board of Regents at Ole Miss, who are helping with the NIL and all that. They want a resolution before the end of next week,
Hmm.
one way or another. I mean, because they can't be held hostage by Lane's, in I get Lane saying I don't want to do this till the end of the season. I understand that. But if the end of the season is that you're leaving, you could have told me that 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Uh, it's got to weigh on the players because nobody's talking about them playing against Mississippi State. They're talking about that. Where's the coach?
Hmm.
And it takes totally away from it. Actually, in some ways, it's cruel in so much as this should be a celebratory time for Ole Miss. I mean, it's been since 1960 since they've even come close to this, and so now what good. Well, it should be a good story, a fun story, right? The underdog. They're kind of like the Indiana of the Big Ten.
Hmm.
Here they are. And oh, by the way, just not for nothing, as we said yesterday, they're the ones who took the chance on him. A
Yeah, they are.
lot of people didn't want to even touch him, and he was down there at Florida Atlantic, in the I guess we were Conference USA at that time. Um, basically hanging out and going out fishing. I mean, that was pretty much Lane's life at that point in time.
Yeah, it drug on for a lot longer than it should have. There was something that popped up on the social media pages of one of the players that I thought was kind of telling,
Hmm.
and it was on X their running back Kwan Lacey, who had another
He's
fantastic.
a stud, boy. That
Yeah,
is a.
he's fantastic. But it showed up on his profile. He retweeted something, and it was something to the effect of, like, look at everything that Ole Miss players are doing and this team has been doing, and
Hmm.
all anybody can talk about is the coach. And he reposted that. And that doesn't it wasn't him that wrote it,
Hmm.
but you're reposting it as if it's your similar thought process or a shared idea that you have with that person.
Yeah, you wouldn't repost something you disagreed with.
Yeah, exactly. Unless you quote tweeted it and were.
Right. That's a different thing. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was just pure repost. So I think that it is probably affecting that locker room and starting to permeate throughout that locker room a little bit. And I would be curious to see what the kind of effect is in the coming weeks. You're not going to really know anything this week,
Hmm.
aside from Lane making a decision. That would be the only thing that would allow you to know anything. But it appears that the locker room is also starting to hear a lot more about it, and it's starting to take a bit of a toll on them.
Um, I have to wonder what the hell was he doing with Pat McAfee. I know he does. You know, he pops on and talks to Pat, which is fine. But at this time, you really want to go on and say, well, they're not holding a gun to my head, which is basically what he said.
Yeah, it is. It's just, you know, more questionable decision making, I would say, because
Mhm.
your whole thing in this is like, well, why are we talking about this? And then every week you go on somewhere and you talk about it.
Mhm.
So it's something that feels like it needs a resolution. I feel like the media, us, we kind of beat it with a dead horse almost because it feels like we kind of have to. But for Lane, it feels like it's past time to have a resolution come to this. And
Hmm.
I'm just purely shocked that everyone else around him isn't pushing for a resolution on it either.
Yeah, it's people. The reason we're talking about it is everybody wants us to talk about it. And one of the things I think that we've done, at least I'm pleased with, is we haven't put him anywhere yet.
Mhm.
We're telling people, no, don't. We don't know if he's going to Florida. We don't know if he's going to LSU. We don't know if he's staying at Ole Miss because I frankly don't believe he knows.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, because I think every bit of reporting that you hear from people at this point
Mhm.
is, well, the people everywhere feel like they have a really good chance of Lane Kiffin being their head coach next year. So everybody's getting the same spiel from him essentially. I question how much his interest in LSU is legitimate, just based on the state of that program and the involvement right now of the governor, which there was some reporting that supposedly he may not be as in the mud with it as maybe people think. I don't know how much of that I truly believe, but that's what the reporting says based on conversations had with him at an event recently. Um, but it it feels like it's Florida, it's Ole Miss. It feels like this LSU thing has been something that's kind of came up recently to drum up maybe a little more buzz in terms
That's Jimmy
of,
Sexton.
yeah,
I
in
mean,
terms
is
of,
Jimmy Sexton, arranged that visit to put leverage pressure on Florida and on Ole Miss.
yeah.
I
So
mean, because there's no way in hell he's coaching LSU.
I found that very hard to believe myself. And but here I was sitting. I think we did a show on Saturday morning, and I said I thought that
Hmm.
report by James Franklin, it screamed leverage to me.
Hmm.
That didn't ultimately end up happening. It could have been leverage still. Like there's a small chance that it was like a
Hmm.
final shot at leverage because notice he didn't sign until Monday,
Hmm.
until after Sunday, which would be your period to fire coaches. So I do
Right.
think that it's a little bit interesting. Um, but it's a situation that at this point feels far too played out.
Interesting thing. I know that Florida reached out to, of all people, Urban Meyer, um, not to have him come back as a coach, but to get his thoughts.
Hmm.
And he said, "Look, if you can't get Lane, and this one I think will be it's something we talked about the other day.
Hmm.
He suggested Todd Monken.
Yeah, I mean, and again, that goes back to it's something where you may start changing the model of who you're looking for as a head coach
Hmm.
in terms of people that can fit the new mold of college football.
Right.
And I think Todd Monken can very much run a program. Like it's something that while he was at Georgia, he was good with in terms of recruiting
Hmm.
and all of that. And he's gone to the NFL and been nothing but successful with the
Hmm.
Ravens and where that offense is now. So I think that's a great idea. Obviously, I think you're going to have the other candidates, Eli Drinkwitz, Jed Fish, that are
Sure.
in there if you don't. But this is the domino that's holding up the entire college football. We have 2 weeks left in the season, so
Hmm.
this feels weird to say, but it's the domino that's holding up the entire college football offseason in terms of the coaching market.
Well, yeah, but it also is the dominant story.
It is.
I mean, that's the weird part, right? I mean, we're worried about where Lane Kiffin is going, yet there's three fantastic races, you know, yet to be decided in college
Mhm.
football as we get very close to, the college football championship games and then the playoffs. So nobody's talking about that. They're talking about more people are talking about Lane Kiffin. They're talking about Oregon USC, which is a massive game. This it's an elimination game for all intents and purposes.
Mhm.
Um, in the Big Ten, we're not talking about some of the key SEC battles. We're not talking about what's going on in the Big 12. Everything it's Lane Kiffin, all the time.
Yeah, it's Kiffin mania, and it's also getting to the point to where they talked about a couple years ago Lane Kiffin wanting to like had a desire to go somewhere else, like really wanted that LSU job
Hmm.
when he was coming out of Florida Atlantic, and no one wanted him when he was coming out of Florida Atlantic.
Right.
But now it feels like everyone wants Lane Kiffin,
Hell,
and
USF passed on
yeah,
Lincoln.
and so now it's starting to feel a little more like he's kind of always wanted this attention. Now that
Hmm.
he's had it, now that he has it, he's kind of basking in it. Oof.
Well, he was the pariah after he went from Tennessee, out west,
Mm-hmm.
and from that point on, everybody was a little concerned about. Wait a minute, if we hire this guy, how long is he going to be here?
Yeah.
Now, that being said, over the past 6 or so years, it seems as if Lane's personality, so he's going to troll people anyway. But it seems as if he's settled down. He's got his family. Seems to be that whole thing seems to be, uh, you know, good on him for quitting to be such a knucklehead. So he seems to have settled his life down, and you would think, okay, cool. Now he's matured. Now he's ready to just keep going. But man, it's just I don't understand. The one guy who could stop this, or in any way, shape, or form, is the guy who doesn't want to stop it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's Jimmy Sexton. And I also wonder if Lane spent, because he's spent just a majority of his tenure now, or just time as a head coach,
Hmm.
coordinator, whatever you may see him as a villain. He's been in a villain role. He was at Alabama
Yeah.
under Saban. That's a villain role. After he went to USC, that's a villain role. He didn't do well at USC either. He was a villain. He was a villain when he left the Raiders and everything like that. So he's been on the bad side. Now everybody wants Lane Kiffin. And for as much as it could be, Lane just being the belle of the ball and wanting to soak in all the attention, he may also be enjoying not feeling like the villain right now. Seeing three prestigious places um, that are all vying for his services, maybe something where it feels kind of nice to be the one that everybody wants for once. But that doesn't excuse the fact that it's time to get the ball rolling one way or another.
This is kind of like LeBron James' decision, right?
Mm-hmm.
LeBron went from high school directly to the Cavaliers. He never really got the chance to be recruited, okay, wined and dined by all these universities. All of them knew that he was going to go to the pros. So there, was a sense of taking your time. Um, and so, as you say, being the pariah, now he's the belle of the ball, and everybody wants him. Um, so we'll have to see. But the other aspect here, which is something that I don't think as many people think about, is that let's just take Lane out of the equation for a moment. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, their Ole Miss has 90 football players.
Mm-hmm.
They have 45 people that work in the athletic department that are specific to Lane's, team, if you will. This is a lot of collateral damage.
Mm-hmm.
And what are you doing to the lives of those 45 people who work under you, and those 90 kids who came there because you brought them there?
Yeah.
Because he's not going to offboard 90 kids to Florida. That is damn sure not going to happen.
No, it's absolutely not. It's there's just so much that it impacts around him, and it's hard to kind of overstate that enough. And that's
Mhm.
part of the reason why you want to see this thing come to an end, is because there are a lot of other people that's lives are going to be affected. When you leave a university in your head coaching spot, you may bring some people with you, you may not bring some people
Mhm.
with you, but it affects their lives too. And if you're one of the ones that's getting left behind, there's no guarantees that you're going to be on the next staff at that place. You could be,
Mm-mm.
out of a job completely. There's so much turnover that goes into it just from a staff perspective. And
Right.
now with the way that the rosters and everything work is you're now like I think these kids kind of have it owed to them in a sense to know whether or not this guy's going to be there.
Mm-hmm.
That matters. Like it matters a whole lot in terms of this team being able to compete for a national title this year because they're in the playoffs, and right now there's not really a path for them to be out of the playoffs, all things considered. Even if they lose to Mississippi State, they still only have one loss. That would be their second loss. So you've got a team that's going to the playoff. They're in locked in and like a 99% chance to go to the playoff. I don't see there's any amount of carnage that's going to knock them out of that. And now you have that's tainted by this as well. You have a potential of an SEC title, which we've outlined when we're talking about it as well. So there's so much on the line for these
Mm-hmm.
people's personal lives, for the university, for the players on the team when it comes to that championship, for the students there that are a part of this
Mm-hmm.
year and this season. I can tell you, people that were there during the 21 and 22 seasons at Georgia, how much those titles meant to them
Mm-hmm.
while they were in school there and while they were a student there and what it meant to win like that.
Mm-hmm.
These people in the South, they love football a whole heck of a lot, and it's a big reason why they go to some of these schools. And a
Mm-hmm.
season like this at Ole Miss, like you said, hasn't happened since the 60s. It should be something that everybody at that university is able to bask in and celebrate in, but they can't because their head coach might be going to Gainesville or Baton Rouge.
Right. Bumble Bounce. Good to have you in the house. Kiffin is a villain. He's a money grubbing slime ball. Well, we don't know if he's going to go. Maybe he will stay. But there are a lot of people that feel Bubbles' same feeling with regard to that. Um, the the other thing, you just talked about Lacey, right?
Mm-hmm.
The kid, what was it, 200 plus yards on Saturday night? Yeah,
It
something like
was,
that.
yeah, it was something like that. It was
Some
ridiculous.
ridiculous number. And that was against a defense that isn't a bad defense.
No.
So, you know, hell, he should be the story.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you got a kid that he's had five, I think, 5 100 plus rushing day games and a 200 one.
Mm-hmm. So I'll add this piece of context to it since you mentioned that there was the tweet that he retweeted was a response to him being recognized by the Doak Walker Award committee
Right.
for his performance last week.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it was a bigger notion on, like, look at what your players are doing, what they're getting week in and week
Right.
out. And we're not talking about him being recognized by the Doak Walker Award committee. We're talking about where's our head coach going to go.
Right. It also puts the sports information department in absolute chaos
Mm-hmm.
because SIDs are the people who promote these kids for the different awards. Okay, and as a matter of fact, the most famous one is Joe Theismann. Theismann's last name was actually Thiesman. Roger Valdessari, who was the SID at the time at Notre Dame, told him, "We're changing your name to the pronunciation of your name to Theismann, so I can put you on the cover of our, press guide as Theismann for the Heisman."
Mm-hmm.
Tony Dorsett, again, another change of name. It was just Dorset, and they changed it to make it a little bit more, distinguishable by saying Dorset. So, I mean, this is what the kind of stuff that SID is doing. If the
Mm-hmm.
SIDs are, fielding phone calls all day long from media all around the country, wanting to know, this, that, and the other, they're not doing justice to the kids who play in a football game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because hell, Lacey should be up for the Heisman, for God's sake.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's just there's such little press about that team as a whole, given the season that they've had, and you can literally only attribute it to pretty much the one singular thing.
Yeah. Well, let's get off this one for a minute. Something I thought was interesting. I watched an interview with Urban uh, yesterday, and he was talking about then and now. Okay, he said back when he was at Florida, he said that look, I, no coaches were fired at in the middle of the season. He said it basically, yes, it happened, but he said it didn't really happen much. He
Mm-hmm.
said you waited till the end of the season, and then whatever you wanted to do, you did. Um, and he said that that all changed, and things have now gotten much more confusing and messier. But there was the other thing that he said that I thought was very interesting. He said, I'll tell you right now, when I was at Florida and again Ohio State, he said I never lost a recruit to Texas Tech. But he said, I'll tell you what, they are now.
Mm-hmm.
So he goes, I'm not so certain that any of these programs, the quote unquote blue blood programs, are are ever going to get back to that point as long as there's the Texas Techs out there and the other people who are willing to pay them a lot more money than most of these blue blood programs don't feel that they necessarily need a big NIL.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting case because, like at Georgia, with Kirby Smart and the case that he has, is
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to see a freshman really that makes more than an upperclassman at the
Mm-hmm.
University of Georgia. That's just not something they do. Talked about it with the different guys in the place that they're going. LaDamian Guyton's the number one player, I believe, in the 2027 class.
Mm-hmm.
He's committed to Texas Tech. That's a guy that I feel like I can pretty safely say would probably be at Georgia if it weren't for NIL. The same can be said for Justice Terry. I mean, he was a guy last season who chose to go to Texas, and when he's at the podium, he said this is a business decision. And that's the way he described it. It wasn't I have a bunch of love for the University of Texas or anything like that. He said he made a business decision. So
He's
these
not wrong.
yeah, and there you can't fault people for making business decisions either. With some of the money these kids are getting thrown at them, is you'd be like, I can't agree with you if you say, well, I can't back somebody choosing money over their morals or whatever. This is no longer like this isn't something that's immoral. This is something where you have the potential to yeah, you may not make the same money that you're going to make in the NFL, but if you are a person that comes from a background that needs money, this is
Mm-hmm.
life changing money right here in terms of the stuff these guys are working with. So I have no
Mm-hmm.
problems with kids taking their money, and I think kids deserve their money.
Mm-hmm.
But it's
And there's
also,
nothing to say too. Let's use Lacey as an example. There's nothing to say that when Lacey played in that game against Florida, what happens if he tears an Achilles or gets hit the wrong way or whatever happens?
mhm,
That potential that the NFL is bringing him, it ain't coming.
mhm,
But the money that he's got from the NIL, that gives us some backfill to hopefully, in his case, hopefully be involved. So 100%. I mean, give the kids their money while they're in school because a lot of these places just don't treat the kids in a way that they treat them like professionals. They don't treat them like athletes. They don't treat them like students.
mhm. And I feel like it's just such an easy premise that people tend to not like factor in. Two things can be true at the same time. One, kids can absolutely deserve their money as they
Mm-hmm.
do. And two, the process at which they get it and at which it's being presented to them can also be broken. Both
Mm-hmm.
things are true.
Sure.
Um, so, I don't know what resolution is coming down the road in terms of collective bargaining and all that. But there's going to be a little bit more structure around it here in the coming years, you would believe.
Hmm.
And with that, maybe you'll see places that are blue bloods and kind of built on their culture return to being a little bit more powerful than they are even right now. Um, but until then, you're going to have places like a Texas A&M that's going to pay them every bit of money that they ask for.
It's funny. The one last thing from Urban was that he said he couldn't coach now, and he said the reason he couldn't coach is because he says he goes the guys who are successful right now are guys who have the ability to change philosophy and to adapt and to change, from one year to the next how they got to do things because the roster changes are so dramatic. He said he couldn't have done it. He said that's just not I wasn't wired that way.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, so I don't know that I would even be, I don't know I'd be a successful coach no matter where I coached, because I don't have the capacity to recruit kids twice or three times in some cases, or I'm not sure I want to go to the portal and find somebody who clearly didn't want to play for somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
So, he said these coaches now, the ones who were successful, he said, are doing a lot of things that I couldn't do because they're being, because I guess they're being open minded when I had one way of doing it, and then if you did, because they were talking about, well, you treated Tebow and some of these other guys, you know, different. He goes, yeah, he did. He goes, absolutely did. Because
Mm-hmm.
they put in the work, they took it the time. They were the people who are going to get us to where we wanted to go. You're damn right. I treated them different.
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, now you kind of have that in terms of who's getting paid,
Mm-hmm.
but still there's still a cohesive locker room typically. Like
Mm-hmm.
typically the money involved doesn't fracture a locker room. And not that Urban fractured the locker room, but that was definitely seemed to be more of the model that he was working off of while he was there at Florida and the preferential treatment that he gave some guys.
Well, he did the same thing at Ohio State. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
and we saw that act didn't play well in the NFL because he didn't even finish the first season at Jacksonville.
No, he didn't. No, that act did not pass. I think that act stopped when he had his altercation with the kicker pregame.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Can't do that in the NFL. That's
No.
grown man to grown man talk right there, as they say.
Well, yeah. Um, Warren Sapp tells a great story about you know, one of the situations where he was toward the end of his career, he was playing with the Raiders, and he and the coach, I can't remember the coach at that time. For they've had so many, it's hard to keep track. But anyway, he went around. Al Davis was still around. He said to Davis, "This is during halftime." Davis happened to be down where the tunnel was, which he normally wasn't, but he was on that day. And Sapp said, "Do you pay me to tackle the quarterback?"
Mm-hmm.
Which, that's not necessarily before you say hello, how you doing, right? The
Yeah.
first thing you see from a guy, standing there with in full football gear, getting ready for halftime, is asking the owner, "Do you pay me to tackle the quarterback?" The answer quickly was yes. He says, "Well, then get in there and tell the damn coach that he's putting me in positions where I can't get to the guy."
Yeah.
So it's crazy. It's a wild, wild world. And speaking of wild, wild world, speaking about the Raiders, Jon Gruden wants to be back on the sidelines. He wants to do it in college. And right now, Arkansas, Auburn, UCLA all have admitted they've spoken to him.
Mm-hmm.
To what extent, I have no idea. But I would not be surprised that if we wake up tomorrow or in a couple of days, Jon Gruden has a job. Where? If I had to put my money on it, I'd think it'd be UCLA, um, because John likes the big city. I'm not so sure his act would play well in Arkansas. it might in Auburn, but I think those two places have coaches. Well, certainly one of them. The designs, the folks at Auburn are looking down to New Orleans and Tulane and Johnny and saying, you know what, Johnny's our boy. We gotta get him up here as fast as we can.
Hmm. Yeah, I'll be honest and say that I think Arkansas would fare very well with Jon Gruden being their head coach. Like
Hmm.
something has to change, and when I say something, it's their financial investment.
Hmm.
If their financial investment doesn't change, it doesn't matter who they hire. Right now, they just don't have the right NIL game to be able to compete at the top of the SEC.
Hmm.
With that being said, they also have a lot of very wealthy alumni. The Tysons, the
Sure.
Walmart family, Jerry Jones, all of them all graduated from there. Very wealthy alumnus they have. So they have some of the alumni base to be able to infuse money into the program if that need were to arise.
Hmm.
So that's the first part of that. The second part is if you get him in there, nothing changed about Jon Gruden, the actual head coach. He's still a guy that loves football.
Sure.
I feel like he's going to be a guy that's going to be able to create a pretty good culture, and he's also a guy that has spent a majority of his career in the NFL, and so he still has that much more NFL minded
Hmm.
style of approach to the way that he builds his culture with his players. So it's one that's much better suited for this era of college football as well.
Well, John was always a player's coach,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's you know that says something, because you have to be a player's coach here, um, in these days and times, if you're going to have success.
Yeah, you absolutely do. Um, and that's like I am of the belief that he could build that where in college now. UCLA is interesting just because we talked earlier in the year a lot about
Hmm.
UCLA and where they are as a program and what the outlook is, and said some changes needed to be made for that program if they were going to get back to a point of relevance. Um,
Hmm.
you know better than I. I don't know what kind of changes may or may not have been made. I am unaware of any changes in terms of an athletic director, at least off the top of my head. So there is that portion of the UCLA job, I feel like, too.
Well, I think John there's enough people who know John who he might actually be able to help them in bringing somebody in to run that show,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what John loved to do, that sort of thing, which is basically take somebody else's job, somebody else's position, and say, it's time for you to go. Um,
Mm-hmm.
which is exactly what he did with Rich McKay. Um, Rich built the program, and or not, yeah, it was Rich. And then he went to Atlanta. So at the end of the day, what exactly did they do? Well, what they did is they ended up setting up Atlanta and other places to get better, because John's ego at the time, much like Lane, frankly, resulted around, I need to be the person in charge here,
Yeah.
and that means you've got to do it my way. And he literally had a situation where the you know the Glaciers had to make a decision: do we knock out Rich to keep John, or do we keep Rich and run the risk of losing John?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yeah.
clearly they made the situation with John, but he was coming off of a Super Bowl.
Yeah. It feels like a relatively easy choice there
Yeah,
for a guy that just won you a Super Bowl. No, he would be a good fit, but they have to be prepared for everything that Jon Gruden is as well,
right.
which, isn't that's something that obviously any place that he would be hired at they're well versed in who he is, and he's there to win them football games. And I think when you hire John to win you football games, that's exactly what he's going to do.
Well, no,
Outside of
yeah,
everything
no
else.
offense meant to the folks at at Arkansas, but if they can put up with Bobby Petrino, they can easily put Jon Gruden.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Not throwing shade on anybody, but yeah, if you can sell that deal, you got a pretty good chance of making it work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I mean, I think there was going to be a legitimate cry that if Bobby Petrino hadn't taken over, like if you'd given the interim slot to somebody else and Bobby Petrino hadn't taken over,
Right.
there would have been a legitimate thing of like, well, why doesn't he deserve a shot? Luckily
Right.
for them, they made the correct decision. They gave Bobby Petrino his shot as the interim. It has not worked out, so they know they've saved themselves round two of Bobby Petrino's madness.
You know, one thing that came to mind in this coaching carousel situation that I'm I'm a little confused as to why it hasn't. Stanford's out there.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a bad job.
Yeah, I think that's more people forgetting that after this year, Frank Reich's contract is up. It's a 1 year deal.
Yeah.
I think people may forget that. I'm not really 100% sure. I also wouldn't be surprised if Andrew Luck didn't go, hey, you sure? Like, you sure you want to be done? So I think there's also a real possibility that Frank Reich may just be back at Stanford next year.
Well, my understanding with Oliver was that he would have that he would that Frank would be Oliver's. I hasten to say general manager, but director of player person, whatever you want to call it. Um, and because I don't think he Frank wanted to coach much more.
Hmm.
I could be wrong on that, but I think that was the theory of the case was okay. I want to do this, but I don't want to do that forever.
Yeah.
So he came out of retirement to, because Frank's actually still being paid by people. So I don't know how much he wants to coach and specifically coach college football, but obviously he could be the guy. But I don't know if he's your long term solution.
Yeah, no, I definitely don't think he would be a long term solution. So then that's more of a determining factor of if he's not, then you're kind of looking who would be our successor if
Mm-hmm.
he were to still be the pick for next year. I don't know if that's something they're thinking about, but
It's a better job than people get them credit for.
oh yeah, absolutely it is. So they have the academics portion, which is
Mm-hmm.
something that's not going to change around there. I would assume they stick pretty steadfast
They
to their
do.
academic requirements when it comes to accepting students in terms
Mm-hmm.
of athletes. So they do have that hurdle there at Stanford, but there's a lot of kids that can still get into Stanford that are very good football players, and that got proven, in years prior to where we are now. Is Stanford has had a really good football program in the past. It's not
Mm-hmm.
like we're talking about some kind of a school for the blind and the deaf here.
Yeah.
They've had a really good football program. They can have another one. The financial or the academic excuses are generally just ones that people kind of carve out. Like it was the reason that Brian Kelly couldn't win at Notre Dame. Turns out Brian Kelly could have won at Notre Dame, but he didn't. Marcus
Right.
Freeman's now winning at Notre Dame, and Brian Kelly's now out of a job.
Brian alienated a lot of high school coaches in the state of Ohio. And a significant chunk of the successful players that that helped Lou Holtz in the day were from the state of Ohio. You may remember that Lou actually took Jerry Faust's place, and Jerry Faust was a high school coach in Ohio. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, when Notre Dame hires a high school coach, you pretty much know that they've got a pipeline to Ohio and Western Pennsylvania that's pretty strong. So, from that standpoint, yeah, it's one of those things where you look at it and go, but look, Christian McCaffrey doesn't look like he did badly whenever he went to Stanford and ended up playing in the, he ended up staying in town. I mean, he didn't even go out of the area.
Yeah, yeah. Luckily for him, he got back out there eventually.
Hmm.
they held him hostage there in Carolina for a while.
Right.
They eventually made it back. Um, so yeah, you can succeed there. That's it's a place that you can succeed at. It's a place that I'll be curious to see just how big of a splash they're capable of making. Because I think you and I both think it's a really good job. Now it's more of a who are you going to get in there that also believes it's a very good job.
Hmm.
That is the combination. Because right now we talked about the head coaching pool. It doesn't feel like it's that strong, all things considered. Even with all the openings there are. The coaching pool itself does not feel like it's the strongest. In fact, I just saw something that said John Summerall is actually meeting with the University of Florida now.
Again, that wouldn't surprise me. I think that would be a good hire.
Mm-hmm.
John
Yeah, it's.
Summerall's done a really nice job at Tulane.
I'm.
And go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say I'm gonna be very curious to see who John Summerall ends up with because they could very much be the winner of this coaching cycle. The school who feels like maybe John Summerall landed in their lap when they didn't get Lane Kiffin.
Yeah, that's kind of funny, isn't it? That the guy who ends up being the basic, for all intents and purposes, the second choice prize ends up being the guy who takes you to better situations than you had before. I think it's different with John than it was with Billy. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you're not. The concern was we went to we went down to the G5 and got us a guy, and it turned out to bite us in the ass. Um, I just don't think that's necessarily the concern, or should anyway be the concern of of the group at this point in time. I think he's proven that you know that he John can coach because he's done such a. It's very likely, frankly, that Tulane's going to end up being back to back winners in the American. It's a good
Mm-hmm.
possibility. So I find it hard to believe that he's going to burn out or flame out because he knows what big time college football is all about.
Yeah, that is true. I'm actually kind of curious, or I thought it was very interesting. Just a quick aside here. I think last night you probably have James Madison as the biggest loser of those college football playoff rankings
Mm-hmm.
because they just told James Madison everything you've done kind of doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that you only have one loss to Louisville on
Mm-hmm.
the road, like by in a game that was very close. If they had sat down and watched it, there's no telling if they actually did or didn't. But in a game that was very close because Tulane's ranked and they're not. And I'm not sure, based on the way that Hunter Yurachek spoke last night, I'm not sure how much of a path they reasonably have to the college football playoff.
You talked about James Madison.
Yeah.
There's no way they could be making it to the playoffs. They could go. They could go out tomorrow and beat Notre Dame. They wouldn't make it.
Yeah.
I mean, not that it's just. I'm trying to find a way to do this without making it sound nefarious, but there's no other way of doing it. The fact of the matter is, they love the concept of the kind of like what we see in March Madness, right? That you get the Cinderella team that's for the first time having an opportunity and all that. They love the concept. They just don't like the fact that it would happen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they 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 would prefer to have ratings monsters as opposed to whether or not James Madison, or for that matter. I mean, last year it was Aston Gently and the guys from Boise.
Mm-hmm.
If you really did like underdogs, well, there you go. That was your underdog.
Mm-hmm.
And to an extent, I would absolutely, I think more. I'm not so sure underdog, but more of a surprise was what happened with SMU. So
Mm-hmm.
you actually had two kind of underdogs in a row because they weren't thought to be the blue bloods of college, but there they were.
Yeah, I mean, even Arizona State, I think you can class.
That's another good one. You're absolutely right.
Um, so yeah, the Cinderella story isn't going to just in the way that college football is a sport. Your Cinderella story is going to come from schools like Arizona State, not going to be coming from schools like James Madison,
Mm-mm.
typically speaking. Because I think you saw what you saw in the finals, or in the what was it, the quarterfinals? Is that technically what the matchup
Yeah.
of Fiesta Bowl was?
Mm-hmm.
So you had the quarterfinals between Boise and Penn State, and that game, it may not have looked as wide as you maybe thought it was going to be, but there was a wide margin between that Boise and that Penn State team last year, and that's really honestly one of the better versions of a G5 school that you're going to get, and now you're going to get them on the road every time. That just diminishes their chances all the more.
Mm-hmm. And it's bad for James Madison. I feel badly for them, but that I can't argue with it. I from a standpoint of if I'm programming it from the network standpoint, it's not even a blip. It's like I'll take them. Do not give me James Madison.
Mm-hmm. What I'll add in terms of you're talking about the scheduling and why they like
Mm-hmm.
bigger brands, that also surprises me based on what they did with Texas last night. Because what they did with Texas was they eliminated Texas from the college football playoff last night is what they did.
Right.
But when they moved them to 17, that takes any and all path out. There is no longer a path for the University of Texas to make the college football playoff. It's just not possible. Because now I'm looking at the way the bracket shakes out, and I see Alabama sitting at 10, and have an understanding that if they did not have that college or that SEC championship potential still, then
Mm-hmm.
they would not control their own destiny. But in terms of them playing, I believe they still control their own destiny in terms of making it to the SEC title. Roughly, I think a lot of stuff has to break a certain way for them not to actually have full autonomy over their destiny. But assuming they make the SEC title, they win the SEC title, they'll be in anyways. But if they don't make the SEC title
Right.
and they still beat Auburn, they don't have full control because BYU is lurking right behind them at 11. And there's a very real world where you get to that Big 12 title game, BYU beats Texas Tech. You're not
Mm-hmm.
knocking Texas Tech out of the college football playoff, but you've added another champion that has to be in along with that ACC champion and along with that G5 champion. And now all of a sudden being in the top 10 still isn't enough to secure your spot into the 12-team college football playoff field.
No. And you got to wonder, right? What's going on from that standpoint? You want to have the best teams playing,
Mm-hmm.
but I mean, do I think that they wanted to bounce Texas? No, but could they justify having them? No.
No. And that's what makes it really interesting with Miami because I think when we all watch the ACC,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anyone's fooled. Talent-wise, yes, Miami is the best roster in the ACC. I don't think that's that hot of a take or honestly that much up for debate. But they aren't the most consistent team in the ACC, and that's what bites them is because they can't win the games that they're supposed to win against an SMU and a Louisville. Those are games that they should have won. Those are two teams that, while they're having good years, they shouldn't be having years that have them beating you, especially not at home like Louisville
Mm-hmm.
did. There's that side of things. And so they have problems now that they can't control their own destiny. They're obviously the best team. And now the ACC is going out there and they're essentially just running Miami propaganda up and down. And now it's believed Miami fans that they have a legitimate case. They have a legitimate case against Notre Dame. No, you don't have a legitimate case against Notre Dame. Notre Dame's losses are to you by 3 points,
Right.
and they're the number 3 team in the country by a point. I don't want to hear it. Your losses aren't comparable. You play in a significantly worse conference, so you don't have a leg to stand on when it comes to Miami in terms of their argument for the college football playoff. You're not making it at an as large as an at-large bid, and you aren't making the ACC title either. So your hopes are dead. I don't care how close you are. You don't have a shot. It's a really similar feel to the way South Carolina was last year. They
Mm-hmm.
came on strong, they finished strong, but they lost a game or two in the mix that they shouldn't have. The same with Ole Miss last year. They
Mm-hmm.
lost a game that they shouldn't have. Same with Alabama last year, where you lose games you shouldn't, and now you're sitting on the outside looking in. If you handle your business, you're in there. But guess what? You didn't handle your business, and you didn't handle it in conference, which makes it all the more worse. And now you're out here trying to just beg and plead like you're on the street corner for a playoff spot.
Yeah, and it's not going to happen. They're not going to get it, and it's just that one of those bizarre situations from that standpoint. Um, that you've got all these teams. There can only be so many blue bloods, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what's to say now in what Urban was saying about Texas Tech, you know, just basically pouring money into their situations that and we talk about the with FSU and we talk about with Clemson and Carolina in the ACC, but there's also messes all around on the on in Big Ten and other conferences.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what's to say that these blue bloods are blue bloods, but at the end of the day, um, if they're not performing, you can't prop them up much longer.
No, you can't. And that's like Texas can have as many fans as they want to. That's great and it will help them when they have a case.
Hmm.
But you don't have a case. You don't have a case when you get blown out by Georgia. You don't have a case when you go up to Ohio State and even though people will tell you it's a 7-point game, you didn't stand a chance in that football game. I watched it with my own two eyes. I remember what I saw and I remember thinking, man, Ohio State scored 14 points. Texas definitely can't do that. And they couldn't. Like these are images that last. You go down to the swamp and you lose to Florida in the fashion that you lose. You can't do that and still expect a playoff spot. So the same argument is for Texas that is for Miami is you guys didn't do what you're supposed to. And now more than ever, you'd think people would be able to kind of take that and move on because now you're in a situation where, you know, you're back next year. I get it. You're not happy with the results this year. But guess what? Next year, brand new year. And you've got probably just as good a shot as you had coming in this year because it's as wide open as it's ever been. And you've got some of the top financial investment in the country. But you didn't do what you're supposed to this year. You just kind of got to give it up and quit complaining.
Yeah, and from that standpoint, I mean, look at. I think that one of the reasons that Georgia and some of the other programs, Oregon, um, year after year are successful is because they understand that that putting the best team on the field doesn't necessarily mean putting the most expensive team on the field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you like that's Miami's thing is they're big in their financial investments and they love winning the transfer portal in the offseason, but yet you still haven't had it translate into success on the field. You have to a certain extent. You've enjoyed more success than you had prior to Mario Cristobal and the transfer portal, and
Mm-hmm.
that's good. But you're still upset when your culture is not complete and you're losing games late in November that you feel like you shouldn't be losing. And honestly, you probably shouldn't be losing but you're losing them because you're in a different day and age. You got different priorities, and you chose to build your roster in the fashion that you did. So some of this stuff can fall through the cracks.
And usually do. In this case, it does. I mean, I like Mario Cristobal. I think he's a good dude. I mean, back when he was at Miami, I did games and Mario was a fine player. Um, that's cool, but
Mm-hmm.
his game coaching and you can nobody can argue with his ability to recruit. I mean, my God, he's a fantastic recruiter. It's
Yeah.
his game management is his biggest problem.
Yep. It absolutely is, and it's something that they haven't overcame yet. And I think there's definitely a legitimate case of how many tries does he get now in college football? Because I think that is a legitimate question that's going to start being asked. Is how many tries does Mario Cristobal get? Because when you see guys like James Franklin and Brian Kelly get axed in the fashion that they get axed,
Mm-hmm.
you're now of the understanding that you're not far off when it comes to the chopping block. Like he's been successful at Miami over his 2 years, and he's done a very good job at that program. I would say pretty confidently that he's not safe if he goes out there and gives them a similar result that he did this year. I would say that his job probably wouldn't be safe next year, just because that's the way the college football calendar works. There's more fire than ever.
I think that you're right in one area, but Miami's different. Um, they like the idea of the U when the U was the U, right?
Mm-hmm.
That they liked. They didn't particularly like how it happened, but they didn't. Nobody said anything. You know, there were four or five times that Jimmy got called on the carpet for how he was doing things, but Jimmy left there. I mean, nobody fired Jimmy. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
Miami usually doesn't fire coaches. Now they have had a couple of situations where they did. Al Golden, who's actually having some success at this time, and obviously Mark Rick,
Mm-hmm.
was gone from there. But Miami has they kind of look at themselves, and they've actually modeled themselves. We may even talk about this as quote unquote the Stanford of the East. So there's a real push pull there in Miami. There's on one side you've got it's a private school, it's a small school. You got people on campus who go there, and is football the number one thing on the campus? No, there has never been really a solid push to put a stadium on the campus.
Mm-hmm.
It's 45 minutes from Coral Gables to where the damn team plays now. Um, it's just it was the Orange Bowl was not far away. Well, that's where the Miami Marlins play now. Their stadium's sitting on what used to be the Orange Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of got a UCLA situation going here, where there's nothing on campus. You got to go all the way from Westwood to Pasadena to make that work. Um, and so I'm not overly sold that. Yeah, they got some backing, and that's great and good on them, right? But I'm not sure they're that keen on paying, buyouts. I mean, if you look at Golden, didn't have a. I mean, Golden's buyout was, you know, basically meal money at this point for some of these buyouts.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think Mark get a buyout, or did he just leave?
I'm not really sure. It would not surprise me if he had just kind of left.
Yeah, I don't. I think he felt that this was not going to work for him, in
Yeah.
large part because, in fairness to him, Miami didn't do anything of what they told him they was going to do.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm not so sure that Cristobal doesn't go back to Miami if it wasn't for his mother, who was ill at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, because Oregon, the place that he left isn't exactly, he wasn't coming from Toledo
No.
or Miami of Ohio. He was coming from a very good situation, a good place, one that you have to be convinced to leave, and that's I think Cristobal of himself is a very good example of the caution that you give these schools when it comes to the hiring of a Lane Kiffin. Cristobal is really your most successful big time head coach transition. It's either him or Kalen DeBoer, and Kalen DeBoer's in year 2, so you don't have as much of
Right.
a
Track
body
record.
to judge him on in terms of his success. So Cristobal is probably your best example, if Cristobal is your best example, is that what you want at Florida? Or obviously they're selling themselves on the dream that he will be what he's at Ole Miss, but he's going to have greater resources to get the job done, so he can take them higher than he's taken to Ole Miss. Which again, great in theory. It's the same hiring principle that was used at Texas A&M when they hired Jimbo Fisher. It's the same hiring principle that was used with Brian Kelly when they hired him at LSU.
Mm-hmm.
So the job that Mario has done, it has been a good job. Don't get me wrong, but it's also the best job that someone's done making a move similar to that of Lane Kiffin. So if you're happy with what's going on at Miami, great. Go ahead, hire him. But I think it's a little bit of a cautionary tale as to what it looks like when you're really going after that big fish in college football.
Well, and to your point on that, when they hired Mario, it was it was a homecoming, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of like Mark when Rick went to Miami. I mean, a lot of people forget Rick was a quarterback in Miami.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the Miami fans forgot that he was a quarterback at Miami. But that being said, the interesting part in that was, he had it written into his contract that the only time he would leave, and if he left, it was, it wasn't a payout of any sort. The only place he'd leave was for Miami.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's the same thing that when Lou Holtz back in the day was in Minnesota, right? In his contract, the only school that he said he would, leave, and they signed the deal, was if he got an opportunity to coach at Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the interesting part of this is that, Mario Cristobal is a good person, okay, and I think he has a good heart, and I think he does. And I've talked to people who he's recruited or even attempted to recruit, and he's always straight with them. And the kids actually like him. The players like him. The school likes him. But at the end of the day, he gets judged on wins and losses, and you know he's lost games that he should have won,
Mm-hmm.
and unfortunately, he's won. He's lost more games he should have won than he's won more games he could have lost.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of an interesting, as you said, it's a cautionary tale, but it's one of those things where, again, in his situation, I think is very unique, and one which is going to be an interesting one from here on out.
Yeah. I say all that talking about the big hire, and I'm in the middle of writing something that is praising Virginia Tech for hiring James Franklin. I think, at least in my eyes, it's a big hire for Virginia Tech, and
It's a
one that,
huge hire for Virginia Tech.
and one that you could see a very similar parallel in terms of the argument of making the big hire. But there's good and bad in it all. But I think what Chris Bull has done at Miami is something that he's probably going to continue to replicate year in and year out. And I
Mm-hmm.
think with where he's been, that you're going to get one where he breaks through. I don't think this is something that's going to continue year over year to
Mm-hmm.
build upon itself. So I do think there's that aspect. When I'm talking about Miami long term, I say it's a cautionary tale. But
Sure.
I'm also one that still believes in Miami with Mario Cristobal at the helm.
Yeah. I mean, there's a better chance of him winning than losing. And you brought up a good point about what's going on in the state of college football in that realm, and that is the a situation where going after the big fish doesn't necessarily always bode well for you.
Mm-hmm.
And hang on one second, we got Exalted One come to Arkansas. All right, well we'll ask John. We'll get him to head to Arkansas for you. So look. You know what you said it earlier. I'm curious as to John had a great time when he was on ESPN as a teacher, right?
Mm-hmm.
He kept showing us the different ways to win and breaking games, and his game film study I thought was always entertaining. If he can replicate that, I mean, he's never done recruiting, so that part we don't know how that will work out. But
Yeah,
John might be a good fit at Arkansas.
yeah. I mean, he very well might be a great fit at Arkansas. I like the prospect of him at Arkansas.
Hmm.
So there is that. He he's a guy that's going to build a culture is what I stick to is that
Hmm.
Jon Gruden is a guy that is going to be able to build a culture wherever he goes. So
Hmm.
there is that. And if they get the financial investment, then Jon Gruden as your head coach feels like a home run hire for Arkansas. I don't really know what they were doing when they hired Sam Pittman. I know they had some success. I really like Sam Pittman from his time at Georgia as the O line coach because that's where he came from when Arkansas
Right.
hired him.
Hmm.
And Arkansas, I think, made a solid hire, but it just wasn't one that was ever going to get it done with the resources that you had. So there is that part as well. But this one feels like a significant step up. And if they were to make it a step that signals Arkansas has invested in football again.
Yeah. I mean, there's that. I'm wondering the the thing that gets me here is, and I think that the it's a good why it was smart. Virginia Tech never would have been able to afford Franklin if he hadn't been on that buyout,
Mm-hmm.
and now they can. And I think that you know, as we wrap things up here, that that sometimes coaches will take that quick extra job because they feel that they were not appreciated.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that James Franklin thought, you know what, this job's open. There's no sense in me dancing around. I got money to play with. Let me show Penn State how wrong they were,
Yeah.
and I can do it at Virginia Tech. Now I have no idea if that's what happened, but I do have a feeling that James, that why else would you take a job that quick? I
Yeah.
mean, hell, he got a job faster than he was only out of work for a month, not even.
Yeah. No, he wasn't out of work long. He was not exactly hurting for it in terms
No.
of his time out of the game.
Hmm.
So there is that. He so
Yep. All right. Well, tomorrow we have a football game to talk about, which should be fun. The Buffalo Bills have to win, no question about that one. Houston, I don't know. I mean, Houston's played weird. They played some consistently inconsistent games thus far.
Mhm.
So we'll have to see how that works out. But, and of course, unless something amazing happens in the next 24 hours, we'll probably be talking about Lane again. Why? Because that's what you want, and we're here to give you what you want. All right, boys and girls, subscribe, like us, hit the bell. Okay, not too much trouble there. Leave a comment. We'll answer them. Okay,
Mhm.
we're gonna have a major announcement very soon on a sponsor, which we're going to be very excited to have on. So
Absolutely.
we're looking forward to that, and we'll just tease it out with saying if you need want to buy a house somewhere, we got somebody who can get it for you. All right, so hang with us. We'll check that out. In the coming week. And Matthew, any final thoughts before we get out of here on a grim looking outside here in the Mid Atlantic afternoon of Wednesday?
Yeah, similar circumstance over here on the East Coast. It's been pretty gray. In terms of final thoughts, not a whole lot. I can't wait to talk about Lane Kiffin again tomorrow.
Well, at least tell your father that we'll text him when we find out.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah,
Um,
I'll let him know he can turn off the notifications, and I'll let him know once it happens.
right, right. Well, thanks to everybody for joining us today. It was great chatting with you. We'll be back tomorrow around around that 3 o'clock, 3:15 hour. Okay. Take care, everybody. Be well. Bye bye.